They put me in charge of the programs at my own brother's funeral. Not because I'm good at that sort of thing. Because nobody thought to ask whether I was also grieving. I've been useful my whole life. It's the only thing they've never taken from me. I stepped away from the grave, past the leaning white oak at the far edge of the grounds, the one that looks like it gave up on standing straight decades ago, and I pressed my back against its bark and pulled out my phone. October in Concord smells like cold iron and wet leaves and something else I can never name, something that gets in through the ribs. My hands were shaking badly enough that I hit the wrong contact entirely. The voice that answered was not Petra's. If you've ever held it together for people who never once held it together for you, stay with me. This one's yours. If this is the kind of story you've been looking for, subscribe. There's more here that was made for exactly this feeling. 3 weeks before the funeral, I was sitting in the back corner of a coffee place on North Main Street at 6:45 in the morning, doing what I always do before a client presentation, measuring the room. Not consciously. It's a reflex by now. I clock the ceiling height, the light distribution, the way the windows face east so the morning crowd is always squinting toward the counter. I clock the fact that whoever chose those pendant lights picked the right fixture and the wrong finish, and that 3 inches of additional drop would have changed the whole character of the space. I clock all of this before I've ordered, before I've sat down. I had a mood board open on my laptop, the Hartwell Project, a colonial on Warren Street that the new owners wanted to feel lived in rather than restored. I was adjusting the textile palette, moving a rust-colored linen slightly warmer, when I registered that someone was standing beside my table. Not waiting for the seat. Standing. I looked up. He was looking at my screen. Not at me, at the room I'd been building. The arrangement of furniture, the layered rugs, the specific amber of the wall paint I'd specced against the original wainscoting. He was studying it the way I study rooms. Taking inventory. Whose house is that for? He said. And do they know what they actually want? No greeting. No apology for stopping. The question landed like he'd been holding it for a while and had simply decided now was when he'd ask. I should have said something deflecting. Client confidentiality, or can I help you, or the particular smile I keep ready for strangers who cross professional lines in public. I said none of those things. They think they want period accurate, I said. They actually want somewhere that feels like it's been loved.
He looked at me then.
Silver gray hair worn flat, a face that was hard to age, a suit that had no business being in a coffee shop at 6:45 in the morning. And you can tell the difference. Always. He was quiet a moment. Not the silence of someone deciding whether to keep talking. The silence of someone who has already decided and is simply waiting for the right point. That's rare, he said. He ordered, and I watched him give the barista his name, Jonathan, without looking up from his phone. He did not move away from my table. He read whatever was on his screen. He was not performing indifference. He simply did not need to perform anything. My coffee went cold. I pulled up a new document and pretended to work. I was not working. I was aware of the specific weight of a room that has someone unusual in it, the way the air redistributes itself. He came back with his cup and he set it on the edge of my table, not sitting, just pausing, and he looked at the screen again. The rug in the front room, he said. You've centered it on the fireplace. The room will read wrong. The original hearth is off-axis by 14 inches. I stared at him. I've been in that house, he said. Not apologetically. As a fact. When? A beat. Some time ago. I turned back to my screen. Measured. He was right. 14 inches, give or take. I'd been working from photographs and hadn't flagged it yet. I moved the anchor point of the rug arrangement. The whole room shifted. Settled. I didn't say, thank you. I was too occupied with the fact that he'd seen it in 10 seconds from a standing position in a coffee shop. When I finally looked up again, I meant to ask how long ago. What he'd been doing there in that particular house on Warren Street, at whatever time he meant by some time ago. What I said instead was, "I'm Sasha." I know. I hadn't told him. My name wasn't visible anywhere on the screen. He offered nothing further. He picked up his cup. He was leaving. I wrote my number on the back of a business card and held it out before I had fully decided to do it. He took it. He looked at it the way he had looked at the mood board, not at the information, at the thing behind the information. Then he left. I sat in the coffee shop for another 20 minutes after that, laptop open, cursor blinking, not moving it. The October light was coming fully through the east-facing windows by then, and everyone around me was squinting, and I was thinking about what it means when a stranger is more careful with your work than the people who are supposed to love you. I decided it was nothing. On the drive back to the studio, I decided it again. The morning came in gray, and stayed that way. Not the soft gray of overcast skies that might break by afternoon. The fixed gray of a day that has already decided. I drove to the cemetery with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, watching Concord pass in muted tones, the brick storefronts, the bare elms, the particular way October drains color from everything it touches. The iron gate at the entrance was cold enough to sting through my gloves when I pushed it open. I know because I was the one who pushed it. I arrived 40 minutes early because someone had to, and the someone was always me. My Aunt Rennie found me at 7:50, before the other mourners had fully gathered, while I was still checking that the flower arrangements were positioned the way the funeral director had discussed. She said it like a compliment. "You're so good at this sort of thing." She meant the logistics, the coordination, the quiet management of all the pieces that need managing so everyone else can simply arrive and feel. I straightened a white chrysanthemum that didn't need straightening. "Of course," I said. She squeezed my arm and walked toward the family canopy, where the chairs were arranged in 2 rows. I counted them from a distance. 7 chairs. My mother, my father, my father's brother, Rennie's husband, my cousin Bridget, and 1 empty seat at the end, reserved, I assumed, for a late arrival. I found out at 8:15, when everyone was seated and the empty chair stayed empty, that had been reserved for Caleb's college roommate, who had driven 4 hours from Providence. I stood at the edge of the canopy and held programs. My Uncle Gareth gave the eulogy. He has a voice built for rooms like that, deep, carrying, the kind that makes grief feel formal and therefore manageable. He spoke for 11 minutes. I know because I counted. He talked about the boy Caleb had been, the man he became, the particular quality of his laugh, the way he filled a room. He was, in many ways, Gareth said near the end, an only child in spirit. Self-contained. Complete. I was looking at the ground when he said it. The grass was still wet from 2 nights of rain, and the edge of my left shoe had been damp since I arrived, and I focused on that, the specific cold of it working through the leather. I thought, he is not saying what you think he is saying. I thought, he simply means Caleb was independent. I thought these things with great deliberateness, the way you press on a bruise to locate exactly how bad it is. Then the service ended, and I collected the leftover programs and I walked. I don't know what I intended. Away, mostly. Past the family cluster, past the funeral director with his clipboard, past the stone for a woman named Marit Lund who died in 1931 and whose name I have always noticed without knowing why. I ended up at the white oak at the far edge of the grounds, the one that leans east, listing slightly, roots lifting the earth on one side in a long, low ridge. My hands were shaking by then. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Petra's name. My vision had gone a little imprecise at the edges, the way it does when the crying is still deciding whether to come. I press call. The phone rang twice. Yes. One word. Low. Unhurried. Not Petra's voice. I stood very still. The voice said, "Are you all right?" Not a question, a reading. The way a doctor says it when they already know the answer and are giving you the chance to say it first. I dialed the wrong number, I said. A pause. I know. Are you all right? The wind moved through the oak above me. Somewhere behind me, I could hear my mother's voice, that particular carrying tone she uses when she is being publicly gracious, the one that sounds like warmth from a distance. No, I said. He didn't say I'm sorry or what happened or any of the things people say to fill the space after an honest answer. He said, "Where are you?" I told him, "The cemetery off North State Street. The white oak near the back wall. Stay there." He arrived in 19 minutes. I heard the car before I saw it, a low sound, the kind an engine makes when it isn't working very hard, and doesn't need to be. It pulled to the curb along the cemetery road, and Jonathan got out, and he did not hurry across the grounds toward me. He walked at the pace of a man who has decided where he is going. My mother saw him first. I watched her face do the thing it does when something has entered a space she believed was controlled. Her chin lifted, her eyes tracked. The air between my family and the gate changed. He kept walking. There is a particular exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. I know it well. It lives in the shoulders, just below where tension usually sits. It comes from a full day of holding your face correctly, of performing composure for people who would use any crack in it against you. By the time Jonathan followed me up the stairs to my apartment on Pleasant Street, I was running on the last thin reserve of it, and I knew it, and I didn't ask him to leave. That tells you something about where I was. The apartment looked the way it always looks. Orderly, functional, and completely without warmth. For years I've lived there. The walls are still the color the previous tenant chose. A flat off-white that I have always meant to change and never have, because changing them would mean deciding what I want the space to feel like, and I have spent most of my professional life making that decision for other people. Jonathan stood in my kitchen and looked at the walls the way I'd looked at the Warren Street Colonial's rug, taking inventory, noting the absence. He didn't comment. He filled a kettle and set it on the burner like he'd done it before, and I sat down at the kitchen table and put my hands flat on the surface and stared at them until they stopped moving. We didn't speak for a long time. The kettle built. Outside, Pleasant Street had gone fully quiet, that specific late-night silence of a residential block where everyone has been asleep for hours and the only sound is the occasional car on the main road, distant enough to be almost soothing. He set a mug in front of me, sat across the table. I looked at him. In the flat kitchen light, something about the way he held stillness was different from how people usually hold it. Most people are still because nothing is happening. He was still the way a room is still when it's been carefully arranged, on purpose, with awareness of every element. "What are you?" I said. He didn't hesitate. He told me. I want to say my first response was disbelief. It would be the more sensible thing to report. The more defensible. My first response was that it explained the house on Warren Street, the particular accuracy of 14 inches. The way he'd looked at my mood board not with curiosity but with recognition, as though he had opinions about interior proportions accumulated across more time than I could easily calculate. I sat with what he'd said. The tea cooled in front of me. I wrapped both hands around the mug without drinking it, just for the warmth, and I looked at the table, and I thought about the fact that I was not afraid. I kept waiting for it. The fear, the rational response, the part of me that should have been moving toward the door. It didn't come. What came instead was something I recognized from client consultations. The feeling of a room finally making sense once you understand its proportions. "How long?" I said. "Long enough that your city has changed names twice since I first came to it." I considered that. "And you kept my number?" "Yes." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, deliberate. The way someone is quiet when they are choosing precision over speed. "You looked at that coffee shop before you looked at the person behind the counter," he said. "You clocked the ceiling. the light, the fixture with the wrong finish. You did all of it in under 4 seconds, and then you sat down and opened your work, and you set your coffee to the left of your laptop, out of the way, as if you already knew the work was the point. I didn't move. I have met very few people, he said, who are that clear about what they are for. The kitchen was very quiet. Most people want things from rooms, he said. Comfort, status, a particular impression. You wanted to understand it. That's different. I looked at him across the table. 31 years of being handed programs, of being the one who coordinates flowers and stands at the edge of canopies, of building other people's spaces into places that felt like home while my own walls stayed blank. He had not said, "You're useful." He had not said, "You're good at this sort of thing." He had said, "I notice what you are for." And I kept it. I didn't know what to do with that. I turned back to my mug, drank the cold tea without tasting it. Dawn came through the kitchen window incrementally, gray first, then a thin line of something warmer along the sill. Jonathan was still at the table. I was still at the table. Neither of us had moved toward anything or away from anything, and the walls were still the previous tenant's color, and nothing had been decided. Only something had settled. I couldn't have named it then. I'm not sure I can name it now. It was the specific weight of a thing that has been true for a long time, finally allowed to take up the space it needed. The studio smells like drafting paper and the particular cold of a room that hasn't been heated long enough yet. I like that about Tuesday mornings. The radiator clicks. The light comes in low through the north-facing window. Nothing is expected of the space until I decide what to do with it. I had been back at work for 4 days. Not because I was ready, because the alternative was sitting in my apartment watching the walls stay blank, and I had done enough of that. Theo was at the drafting table when I arrived, annotating a floor plan for the Merrimack project with the focused efficiency of a man who genuinely does not understand why anyone would do a job they didn't intend to do well. He is like that about everything. He has been my business partner for 6 years, and in 6 years I have never once heard him say something he didn't mean. He looked up when I came in, assessed me the way he assesses floor plans, quickly, completely, and said, "There's coffee." "Thank you." That was all. He went back to his annotations. I went to my desk. The morning held. My mother arrived at 10:40. I heard her heels on the stairs before the door opened. That deliberate rhythm. The one that means she has prepared what she is going to say and intends to say it in sequence. She came in wearing the gray coat she reserves for occasions that require her to look reasonable. She looked at Theo. He looked at her. He did not leave. "I'd like to speak with Sasha privately," she said. "I'm sure you would," Theo said, and turned back to his floor plan. "My mother's name is Constance. She has never once been caught without a response." She looked at me. "You left," she said, "during the reception. While people were still there, while family was still there. You simply walked out." I kept my hands around my coffee mug. "Yes." "Do you have any idea how that looked?" "I do." Caleb's friends were there. His colleagues. People who drove hours. "I know who was there," I said. I coordinated the flowers. The room went quiet. Theo's pen did not stop moving. My mother took a breath, the kind that precedes a pivot. "He would have wanted you there. You know that. Whatever you think of me, whatever grievance you've decided to carry right now, Caleb would have wanted his family together." There it was. I had known it was coming. I had known it the way you know a particular kind of weather. You can feel it in the pressure before the sky changes. She had saved him for last because he was the one I couldn't argue against, the one whose name in her mouth turned my knowing into doubt. My hands tightened on the mug. I was going to say, "You're right." I could feel the words forming, the old reflex firing, the familiar path of least resistance worn smooth by 29 years of use. Constance. Theo said it without looking up. Just her name. Flat and clear, the way you'd name a fault line on a map. She turned to him. Your daughter, he said, still annotating, coordinated the flowers, stood through the service without a chair, was not mentioned once in the eulogy, and managed the reception she was assigned rather than invited to. He turned a page. She left when she'd had enough. That's not a grievance. That's a boundary. They look similar from where you're standing, but they're not the same thing. The room held very still.
My mother looked at me,
waiting, I think, for me to soften it, to apologize for what he'd said the way I'd always apologized for what other people said when it happened to be true. I looked at my coffee. She left, the heels on the stairs receding, the street door opening and closing. Theo put the kettle on. He didn't say anything about what had happened. He didn't look at me with the careful expression people use when they want credit for witnessing your pain. He simply filled the kettle and set it on the burner and went back to the Merrimack annotations, and I sat at my desk and stared at the wall where 4 years of client projects are pinned in a long-running record of every space I have ever been trusted to transform. The Hartwell Colonial, the office renovation on South Main, the restaurant on Loudon Road whose owner cried when she saw the finished dining room and said she hadn't known it could feel like that. None of them knew about the blank walls on Pleasant Street. None of them knew what my family called my work when they thought I wasn't listening. They only knew what I made. I sat with that for a long time, in the smell of drafting paper and the click of the radiator, while the kettle built behind me. I called her on a Thursday morning before I could talk myself into waiting. That's the thing about decisions that have been forming for a long time. They don't arrive with fanfare. They arrive at 7:43 in the morning while you're standing in your kitchen in yesterday's socks, and you realize the only thing left to do is the thing you've been circling for weeks. The courage isn't dramatic. It's just moving before the hesitation catches up. I dialed. She answered on the second ring. I've been waiting to hear from you, she said. The particular tone of it, patient, aggrieved, the tone of a woman who has decided that waiting is itself a form of suffering she is owed recognition for. I know that tone in my sleep. I have been navigating it since I was old enough to notice that my brother never seemed to trigger it the way I did. I know, I said. I'm calling now. Your behavior at the studio. Theo said what he saw. I'm not going to apologize for that. A pause. Recalibration. Sasha. Her voice dropped into the register she uses when she wants to sound like reason itself. I understand you're grieving. We all are. But this, whatever this is, this pulling away, it isn't what Caleb would have wanted. You know that. He loved this family. He would have wanted us to hold together, especially now. There it was. The same move as before, refined. She had practiced it since Tuesday. I looked at the window above my kitchen sink. The light was coming in at a low angle, the way November light does, thin, honest, without warmth to spare. There is a crack in the upper left corner of that window frame that I have been meaning to seal for 2 winters. I looked at it. Caleb wanted a lot of things, I said. He wanted his family. He wanted to call me. He told me that 8 months before he died that he'd been meaning to call, that things had gotten complicated, that he was going to fix it. My voice was level. I wasn't performing level. I was simply out of the energy required for anything else. He ran out of time to want them. That's not something I can fix by staying in a room where I'm not seen. Silence. Not the silence of someone absorbing what was said. The silence of someone searching for the next angle. You're making a mistake. Her voice had gone precise. You're choosing a man you barely know, some stranger, over the people who raised you, over your brother's memory. And when it falls apart, and it will, because that is what happens with people like him and women who think. Stop. She stopped. I'm not choosing him over you, I said. I'm choosing me. You've had 29 years, and you've used all of them the same way. I'm done waiting for it to change. You'll regret this. Flat now. Final. The last tool in the box. When you have no one, when there's no family left to come back to, you'll regret it. I stood very still in my kitchen. I've had no one for 29 years, I said. I know exactly what it feels like. I ended the call. I put the phone down on the counter and stood there for a moment breathing. My hands were not shaking. That was new. I noticed it the way you notice the absence of a sound you've grown so used to you stopped hearing it, the hum of something that has been running a long time, gone quiet. I made coffee I didn't need. I drank half of it standing at the counter. I did not call anyone. I did not need to tell anyone what had just happened, because it had not happened for an audience. It had happened for me. The Boston contract was open on my laptop. I had been looking at it for 11 days, reading the terms, finding no fault with them, closing the document, opening it again. A residential commission for a townhouse in Beacon Hill, referred through a client of Jonathan's who had seen photographs of the Hartwell Colonial and sent an inquiry that was specific enough to tell me she already knew what she wanted and was simply looking for someone who could execute it at that level. I signed it at 11:15, printed the confirmation, held the paper, set it down. The Edinburgh number had come in 4 days prior, a referral from the Boston client, who had apparently mentioned my name to a friend who was renovating a Georgian terrace in the new town and needed someone who understood how to make old architecture feel lived in rather than preserved. The email was 2 paragraphs. Warm, direct, the language of someone who has worked with good people before and knows how to speak to them. I had been telling myself I would call when things settled. Things were not going to settle. I understood that now. Settled was not a state you arrived at by waiting. It was a state you built, one signed contract at a time, one honest phone call at a time, one decision made before the hesitation caught up. I dialed at 6 in the evening, accounting for the time difference. She answered, Niev, warm and precise, with a directness I recognized and trusted immediately. We talked for 22 minutes. About the building's original cornicing. About light in north-facing rooms. About what it means to restore something that was built to last and make it feel, at the same time, like it belongs to the person living in it now. At the end, she said, I'm very glad you called. So am I said. I wrote the date in my calendar in ink. Not pencil. Ink, the way you write things you intend to keep. 3 months is not a long time. It is long enough. Long enough to sign a lease on a studio with 12-foot ceilings and a freight elevator and walls I chose myself, a warm plaster white that holds morning light without reflecting it, the kind of color that looks simple until you've spent 3 weeks getting it right. Long enough to fly to Boston twice, to Edinburgh once, to sit across a table from a woman in the new town who ran her hand along an original cornice and said I knew you'd understand it before I'd said more than 4 sentences. Long enough for my family to call twice and stop when I didn't answer, the silence afterward settling like weather that has finally passed. Long enough to understand the difference between a life I was maintaining and a life I was building. Jonathan's estate sits on the northwest edge of Concord, where the city gives way to older land, the kind that was old before the city had a name. The elm trees on the grounds are enormous, the sort of trees that have watched several versions of the same argument play out across generations and are no longer surprised by any of it. The house itself is the kind of place I would, under other circumstances, have studied for a week before allowing myself to feel anything in it. The proportions of the entrance hall, the way the staircase was designed to make arriving feel like occasion rather than access, the original wide plank floors that have been walked on long enough to develop their own particular sound. I notice all of it. I always will. That part of me does not turn off. I was standing on the terrace when he came out, the stone cold through the soles of my boots, the November dark fully settled over the grounds. The elms were bare. Their branches made a specific sound in the light wind, a dry, articulate sound, like someone turning pages in a quiet room. He stood beside me without touching me. That is something I have come to understand about him. He does not fill space that hasn't been offered. He waits to be given room, and once he occupies it completely. I want to ask you something, I said. You've asked it before. I want to ask it again. He was quiet. Permission. At the coffee shop, I said. What you told me in my kitchen, I've been sitting with it for 3 months. The way I looked at the room. The way I set my coffee down. I looked at the elms. I need to know if you were being precise or kind, because they feel similar from the inside, and I can't always tell the difference. He considered this with the patience of someone who has learned that the right answer delivered too quickly is indistinguishable from a wrong one. You walked in, he said, and before you looked at the counter, before you looked at the menu, before you looked at a single person in that room, you looked at the ceiling. The fixture above the counter, the one with the wrong finish. You looked at it for less than 2 seconds. Your expression didn't change. You filed it and moved on.
He paused.
Then you sat down, opened your work, and moved your coffee 12 inches to the left so it was out of your way. Not because you were tidy, because you had already decided the work was what the next 2 hours were for. The wind moved through the elms. I have known a great many people, he said, across a great deal of time. Most of them wanted things from the rooms they walked into: warmth, approval, a particular impression. You wanted to understand the room. That is not the same want. It is considerably rarer. I looked at my hands on the terrace railing. The stone was very cold. I wanted to tell you that it wasn't kind, I said. That you were just saying what you knew I needed to hear. I know you did. I couldn't make it stick. No, he said, because it's true. This is the part one have the most difficulty with. Not the fact of him, not the centuries, not the particular quality of his stillness that used to unsettle me, and now feels like the only kind of quiet I trust. The difficulty is this: being seen accurately without agenda by someone who has no use for the performance of it. I have spent 29 years managing what people thought of me, contracting myself to fit the space I was given, holding programs at funerals, coordinating flowers, saying of course when I meant why is this mine to carry. I do not know how to simply receive a thing that is true about me and let it stay. He does not push. He says it and he waits, and eventually I stop arguing, and the thing sits between us in the cold November air until I decide what to do with it. I picked it up. The specific thing he'd said, you wanted to understand the room. I took it and I held it the way I hold a color sample against an original surface, measuring whether it belongs. It belonged. I have always known it belonged. The difficulty was never the truth of it. The difficulty was believing I was allowed to keep it. I kept it. There are other women in this city who know what it is to hold things while everyone else grieves. Women who built something real in the margins of their own lives, while the people who should have been watching looked the other way. Women who are only now learning that choosing yourself is not the same as losing everyone else, that sometimes it is the only way to find out who is worth keeping. If this story was already yours before you heard it, if something in it had your name on it, don't let it go.
Subscribe. Stay.
The stories here are made for exactly this kind of recognition. Concord keeps its oldest things quietly. In the deeds. In the foundations. In the particular way certain people look at a room before they look at the person in it. There are others here who came to something like this through the wrong door, the wrong number, the wrong moment, and stayed because it was the first place that felt like it was built to hold them. We don't announce ourselves. We recognize each other. Later, inside, I stood in the entrance hall and looked up at the staircase the way I look at every room I enter for the first time, taking inventory, measuring proportions, noting what is present and what is missing. What was missing was nothing. I noticed that too. My hands were at my sides, warm now from coming in from the cold. They were not shaking.